That's a little background. So this is where I started from in the 80s. So 1980, I went down this road of conservation, and this is my initial work, right? Some people might call it a brick, right? And so this was my initial work. And so it's kind of where we started. And we had high erosion rates. We had 100% tillage in the spring and the fall, and we had all of these things going on. No cover crops, really no grazing systems. So we started in that, and when you'd put a spade in the ground, we had all the horizontal layering. You've seen it. Horizontal layering when your aggregates collapse. And so then we eventually formed a team, and that team would meet, excuse me, every month, and that we would start to educate ourselves. And so if you do it as a group, it's easier, right? You get more input, you get more conversation, you get more support, because we were stepping into an arena that none of us had stepped into before. And so we started looking at, I think what Tyler would have initially called soil quality, right? So there was an effort at one time, especially in the soils arena, about soil quality. It was dynamic soil properties, and you can influence these with management, right? These are things like infiltration, like carbon, soil organic matter, these type things. And so we started looking at that as, how do you do this? Well, we already knew how to destroy carbon. And if you know how to do that, it helps you learn how to restore it. That might sound strange, but if you can do one, you can do the other, right? And so we started educating ourselves, different topic each time, and we would go down that journey and then apply it. So I took this one Friday, same soil. Okay, they're both loams, same soil. Is there a difference? Yeah, there's a tremendous difference. Granted, there's moisture in this one, gives a little darker appearance when it has moisture, but they're both loam soils. And this one has something on the top, right? What do we got on the top?
We got some growth.
Yeah, we got some growth. We got life, right? And so Tyler and I were visiting about this before. Back in the day, we called that the O horizon, organic matter, O horizon. So when we were all forested and we were all prairie, initially, everything had an O horizon, and that's what fed the topsoil. Okay, but this one is a perennial, right? And so this one is a perennial. Okay, now we can also restore it on cropland if you're using covers, but it's probably not going to look as prominent. Okay, and so but my point is, we're to the point now we don't even discuss O horizons, because when you go out into the cropland, you won't see one. And if you do see one, it'll be really, really small. Okay, but a small one's better than none. And so, but if we understand that that's what built these soils, along with ruminants, then we start to understand the process a bit further. Okay, why is this one dark and this one is light?
You might explain what an O horizon is.
Okay, so the O horizon is the accumulation of the litter on the surface year after year after year, and it's in decomp stages. And as it decomposes, those nutrients and minerals are fed into the topsoil. And it provides all the nourishment for life, right? It flourishes because the soil food web likes this environment because it has a roof on it. It's got a roof on the house. And so you start to temper, the temperature doesn't get extremely hot or cold. And so you've set the stage. Everything is food in a home. And so it sets the stage in terms of the decomposition layers. And so if you take your knife, you can actually just cut underneath it, peel it back, and you have the topsoil. But the O horizon has kind of been forgotten, but we need to relearn it and work toward it. It's one of those things that's difficult to achieve, especially in a cropping system, but with covers you got a chance at it. And if we're looking for it and managing for it, I think that also helps. Tyler, anything you wanted to add to that?
Great.
So just kind of a start on what it can be, right? What it can be. Okay, so we're going to go into a few things. If you want to do the North Dakota thing today, that's fine with me. And by that I mean whenever there's a question that pops into your head, comes right out of your mouth. That's fine. That's what I'm used to. That's fine. Okay. So, some disclaimers. Menoken Farm does research. No, we're a conservation demonstration farm. And so we were set up for the foundational items of conservation. These dynamic soil properties, when they're written into the description of a soil health principle, and they're applied. Okay? That's what it was set up for. We do monitoring. Okay? We don't do replicated research, but we do the monitoring. It's from the local indigenous people. You reap what you sow. So the term Menoken in the indigenous language means you reap what you sow. Okay? Number 2, I wrote the soil health principles. No. I wrote the descriptions. But I'm accused of writing the principles in a lot of publications. Okay? And that's, as much as I deny it, it gets worse then. The more denial, the worse it is. But I wrote the descriptions. And so I wrote them, and eventually NRCS accepted them and put them onto their website in North Dakota. And from there was a bunch of cut and paste that went on with other states, even though I said, no, those are our descriptions for the Northern Plains. Yours are different. What I write for a description is not what Tyler would write. Kansas is not North Dakota and vice versa. You know, entirely different ecosystems. And so both Great Plains, but a lot of differences still. Okay. 3, I'm a soil scientist. No, but I could have been your banker. So when I came out of college, my goal was to work in the ag finance world. Okay, and some element of that. But I made a couple mistakes in college. You know, one was called soils and one was called geology. Those were my big mistakes. And I took those and I got hopelessly lost into the vortex. So, anyway. I've been married 49 years. Yes, my wife Kathy is here somewheres with me. And so we've been married 49 years. If she comes with me, I'm good with a long drive or a long trip. If she doesn't come with me, I'm not going. And so it's like that. The two of us together now are just about a whole person. Pretty close. Just about a whole person. This is what we're going to cover. We'll stop anytime. We may not get through it all. Doesn't matter. I don't fight things like lunch or anything else. When you want to stop, we're just going to stop. And so that's how we're going to do this. Little on quotes: geology, minerals, soils, pH, carbon, low carbon crops, bricks, beetles, bioinoculant. I threw a few thoughts in here. There's a lot more, but let's start somewhere. And we'll just walk through some things. If we don't get through any of them and you just want to talk about something, that's fine too, right? Some quotes. If you have wind and water erosion along with water quality and quantity all addressed, then you can get as fancy as you want. But if you don't secure those items, you haven't secured the foundation. Okay? And so that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think it makes a lot of sense in a watershed. Because when that nutrient converts from organic, not plant available, to inorganic, plant available, game's on. Can you secure it? Can you keep it in your field? Can you recycle it in your field where it never leaves your field? Can you do that? When you see wind erosion, that's microscopic clay colloids. When you see that in the air, you've got a huge amount of loss in terms of phosphorus. That phosphorus is going to go a long ways. It's a clay colloid. It's microscopic. And so consequently, you can't tolerate erosion. My dad farmed through the Depression and Dust Bowl. He was born in 1911, and as a young man, he entered into the Dust Bowl. and erosion was not acceptable with him. No form of it. And so everything had to be stable. And so you start to look at that, and that makes a lot of sense. And then we are one with nature. Soil contains and humans contained. We're kind of walking, talking microbes. We have a lot of microbial cells. They're smaller than human cells, but we have a lot of them. You have about 4 pounds of biology in you, in your gut. It tells you things like when you are doing something right or wrong, right? By how you feel about it. You feel a certain way. But without them, you can't digest your food. And the thing that I think we have to be thinking of in today's world, so much of our food system is pre-digested. When your food, in your food chain that you take in daily is pre-digested, a lot of this never gets to your lower tract. It never gets to the point where you can form butyrate with it and it coats the lining of your walls in your stomach. And without that, if you don't get resistant starches to the lower tract, you start to get autoimmune issues. Ulcerative colitis, Crohn's, you start to have trouble in those areas. But in today's world, so much of our food is pre-digested. And so we have to be careful of those things in terms of how we eat. Okay? So the microbes. Oldest task in human history to live on a piece of land without spoiling it. That's a challenge because we are in an extraction business, and when you're in an extraction business, my question to you is, what are you willing to do to put back? What are you willing to do? I won't work with you unless you give me a written goal. And so over the years, I spent most of my career on the end gate of a pickup at the end of a field with a client. If they don't give me a written goal of what's important to them, doesn't have to be lengthy, but if they don't give me that, I'm not going to work with you. Or it's a waste of both of our times. But if you're willing to put a written goal together with your other stakeholders, I think that's a better scenario. No free lunch in nature. Everything's connected. We transfer nutrients from one part of the state to another part. From one area to another. We transfer them, but everything's connected. Right? We take things where there's a lot of it and put it where there's not much. And so it's an oversimplification, but it's very connected. When Howard mentioned having an elevator speech, when you do our law, rock, life, air, water, those are the 4 components geologically we started with. And soil's the intersection of those 4. Everything came from rock. All the minerals had to come out of rock. Okay, there had to be a breakdown process. When it rains, there's carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, forms carbonic acid. It's a slow process of breakdown. Make sense? It's how we got here geologically through those 4 items. Our law. I just remember it that way. Also, I think every state has something they can talk about geologically. They probably all have a geological book that describes them. This is ours. The microbes go back 3.5 billion years. They are really old. First land plants, about 500 million. How about the first people? 200,000 years ago, we started looking like we do today. Okay? And so now, when you look at, I'm 71, that's an eye blink in terms of the microbes, right? How highly evolved they are. So, remember this in school? Remember C.B. Hopkins Cafe, closed Monday morning and night, see you Zune, the management? Right? You all remember that, right? It was likely in your soils book, the page you turned, because it didn't have a picture on it, so you just turned. Okay, so there's about 17 minerals end up in a plant. Now, we can't eat the soil. We can eat parts of it, or small amounts of it, and some peoples have, but we don't typically eat soil, right? We rely on a plant, and we rely on a ruminant. Okay, that would be more normal for us. So, walk through this with me, okay? We want to identify those 17. Sometimes you'll see 18, sometimes you'll see 16. Don't worry about that. Science is what we know today. It is rarely ever complete. It's just what you know today, okay? It's going to expand and continue to go down the road. So give me a mineral that starts with C. What element starts with C?
Carbon.
Carbon. How about B? Boron. H. Hydrogen. O. Oxygen. P. Phosphorus. K. Potassium. N. Nitrogen. S. Sulfur. Calcium. Iron. Chlorine, yeah. This one's probably this one's what? Magnesium and manganese, okay? Molybdenum. Nickel. Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it. Cu. Copper. Very good. Okay. Zn. Zinc. Manganese. Really good. Now you know them. Right? Those are the 17. All right? We need to get those into us too in many forms and fashions, but we need to know what these are. When I was in college, the one that was really important was which one 50-some years ago? Nitrogen. Spent all our time on that one. Which one should have we been looking at? Well, all of them, but calcium was really important. That's a really important one. And so, but all of them is where we should have concentrated on, and we shouldn't have took one out and said this one and ignored the rest. And so, but 50-some years later, we're on track. All right. So we know what these are, macros and micros. We just identified them. We know which ones are cations and ions and those type things, okay? And then the atmosphere. We know nitrogen and oxygen are the dominants, and then we have a plethora of them that are all together less than 1%, okay? They're really small, okay, in those terms. So we know this is that atmosphere portion, all right? Oh, and also, I'll make this offer to Chloe. If you, I think you're videoing this and you're probably going to post it, but if somebody wants this email, this presentation, I'd be willing to email it to you, Chloe, or give you a copy today. And if you want it, you're welcome to it. Okay? That way you don't have to write down so many things, and it's just easier. Okay? Clay colloids, again, big phosphorus transfer. You're in a watershed, or even if you aren't, we're all in a watershed to some degree. But when you're feeding a large municipality, you know, it gets really critical, even more so. And so we can't have wind erosion in that watershed, and it ain't gonna work, right? And so you start looking at this, and you start to understand that that whole process of carbonic acid through carbon dioxide. Okay, so we start to understand that process a bit. All rain is kind of acid rain, right? Remember years back we started talking about acid rain? Well, we've always kind of had some acid rain, right? To some degree. All right, that's how this process broke down. Okay, and then also there's a, this is from Nigel Palmer, and he ferments plants like weeds and gets it down into a liquid. He ferments it down into a liquid, sends it into the lab for analysis, and you find out that weeds are really large accumulators of minerals. So look at the difference in calcium between a nettle and maybe lamb's quarter, between nettle and chickweed. I mean, just look at the differences in them. So these weeds are very specific. They're mineral accumulators, and they are going to try to bring that mineral to the surface and deposit it. And we are going to fight that weed tooth and nail, right? Yeah. And so, but there's a function, okay? There's a reason they're there, okay? So this is an interesting book. The Regenerative Grower's Guide to Garden Amendments is the name of it. I've read it a couple times. We're having him come in May to Menoken Farm and look at the whole fermenting process. Okay, I got a call the other day from the local community college, and they said we need soil for some of our classes. And I said, I'm your guy. And so I went out to the farm. I gathered 3 fields in a row, and I had them on the kitchen table, and I'm staring at them, and I'm going, well, look at that. And so this one, they're all three loams. This one, no cover crop. This one had a single species. This one had a multi-species. Can you pick it out? Every green plant's a carbon inlet. And when you have diversity of green plants, you get diversity of exudates. Okay? This is actually soil in Kansas. This is what it looks like after you sieve it. One of my primary tools are two sieves. It's a 2 millimeter and a 1 millimeter. And you put the 2 millimeter on top of the 1 millimeter, and you crumble in your soil. You get your hand over the top, not the bottom. You shake the bejesus out of it. And then you set aside the top one and you sprinkle out the bottom one, and they will be less than 2 but more than 1 millimeters in size. And now you got aggregates that you can put in water, sprinkle them on water, and you'll know if they're stable or not. Easy indicator. We don't like spending money, and this one give you an answer that same day right on the end gate. And so I like it as a real simple tool. And I don't know that your watershed could afford something this extravagant because, that is easily 3 inches of plastic. And so be careful on how much you spend on it. But VES is one I like to use. You can go online and print that off. It's one sheet. And so Tyler, I don't know if you ever used VES. Okay, so it's a real simple process. Goes 1 through 5, and it's how it feels and how it looks. Anybody can do it. If you do it as a group, it's easier, right? If you do it as a group. So I'm going to give you an oversimplification. This is a 5. It's massive. Okay, this is a 5, right? It doesn't want to crumble. When I pinch it, it doesn't want to crumble. Okay? This is not a 5. This is probably a 1 or a 2, easily a 2. Okay? I can crumble this one so easily. It just breaks apart into thousands of little soil aggregates. But if you're looking for a easy grading mechanism on your own farm, then you take pop your spade into the grasslands, pop them into the cropland, put them into cropland where you grew a cover, get a little comparison, take one out of the garden, and take a look at them. But VES is a really nice, simple process, and I like it because it gives me information. It doesn't cost anything. Okay, you can it's feel and see. I also like to smell it. Should be sweet to neutral, right? If it's pungent, it's gone anaerobic. It's got a lot of compaction. Okay, so VES is real easy. It talks about millimeters and centimeters. Those are right on the side here. Then it describes them for you, how easily it should break when you press. This is a 5. This one has got the big, massive pieces, don't want to break up. This one is very granulated. It's an oversimplification, but how do you fix soil? The old saying was, how do you fix dirt? It's with a green plant. It's a lot of how you fix it. And then I like to put them in a row. So I got 10 fields. I put them all 10 in a little cardboard tube. And then I'll sieve them and I'll rank them on VES. Doesn't cost me anything. I don't have to send them anywhere. It's real simple to do. There's the O horizon that Tyler and I were talking about earlier. That's the material, the organic material, laden with all the nutrients. It's going to slowly feed the topsoil. And you can cut it off right on the surface and bend it back. It's there, okay? This is the one that I took at the Menoken Farm. And you can see where I took it right here. You can see it. It's about a 1/2 inch thick. Okay, it's about a 1/2 inch. I could do better. I could get 3/4 inch, right? And so then you go ahead and you cut it back and you just fold it up, and there's your topsoil right there again. And here I cut it off completely and I put it on top of my spade. And so it's a pretty simple process. This is what it looks like when we degrade and we get the horizontal layering. This is one that I worked on a few years ago. The horizontal layering, you can look at this later, you'll see it in here as well. But you can really pick it out here as the aggregates collapse. When a soil aggregate pore space collapses, you get horizontal layering, okay? And you're going to see it. It's very apparent, and then you get the horizontal root mass. This is more what you need in terms of soil aggregates. Fibrous roots build aggregates. Tap roots build macropores, but a fibrous builds aggregates. So in North Dakota, we used to have corn, bean, wheat. Now we got more corn, bean, but it was the wheat that built the aggregate. It's fibrous. So if you take the fibrous root out of your crop rotation, you're going to have some collapsed soils because you can't build it back as quick as it goes down. Aggregates, they're put together with the glues from the biology, but these glues and these aggregates only last a few weeks, a month, maybe 2, okay? But it's short. Point is, it's a short period of time, so you're building and rebuilding them forever. As long as you're farming, you're going to rebuild them forever. Carbon inlets, this one, carbon's coming in. This one, carbon is coming in. This one has got a brown cover, so most of that carbon is going off as CO2 to the atmosphere, right? Here you're actually going in. Any of these fields look like you? Okay, this is one I'd worked on or tried to work on, but we couldn't come to an agreement on that it needed a change. That's a tough looking field. And so, but we could change that, all right, because there's no cover on that ground. And so we need to do something with that in terms of moderating temperature and getting it stable. If you're not stable, it's hard to go forward. These also, here we got a whole scenario too, nitrous oxide. So this one is made for nitrous oxide because when it gets wet conditions, it's going to go, the end's going to the atmosphere. So there's all these different scenarios, but if you got a green and or brown, these three on the right side, I think you're in the game. But the green, it takes the green to have the inlet. Okay, the brown, that carbon's going to go to the atmosphere primarily. So this is a long-term study at Carrington. North Dakota State University has done this for 35 years. Okay, 35 years, and the only thing they used on it was compost. And this far left one was no-till, the far right one is tillage, and the one in the middle is a minimum type tillage. So when you look right up at the carbon levels at the surface, they appear rather similar. This is after 35 years of repeating it. It's the same process. But what happened on the depth of the carbon on this one? The other thing you can see on this far left one, you see that fracture? Okay, that's not a horizontal fracture, it's a vertical fracture. Now you're coming down with root mass, okay? And so it's a building a deeper process. But you don't always get to see those things, and like Tyler put out here, you don't always get to see those cores, especially to that depth. And so then we can take a look at them. pH, I just wanted to touch on that. Usually there's a range, but if you look at the availability of the nutrient, it likes 6.5, it likes 6.4 for a lot of these type crops, okay? And when we are looking at like the ideal soil, that particular book, The Ideal Soil, version 2, plant sap and soil pH, they recommend a 6.4. You're going to find all kinds of numbers, but I like a range. Most plants like 6.5 to 7. Most plants like to be in that range. Okay, that's a pretty effective range. So there's times where we want to lower pH when you're all familiar, 0 to 14 is our pH range. The high end of the range is alkaline. Some people call it sweet. The low end of the range is alkaline, okay? And so you look at, if you're going to lower your pH because you're up around 8, there's a number of different ways to do that. I just listed them for you. If you're going in your high tunnel or your garden, you can use coffee or vinegar. You need something acidic, right? Because you're going to lower the pH. On the other end of it, if you want to raise pH, because you're already acidic, you're sitting down around 5.5 or something like that, and you want to raise it, what kind of lime source for calcium carbonate do you have? In North Dakota, you'd go to crystal sugar, and you'd get beet lime. And so that would be our local scenario. And also, if you are in a smaller acreage or a garden scenario, then there's other things you can look at: baking soda, eggshells, etc. Gypsum is a great product if you have heavy clays. It doesn't really adjust pH, but it will help disperse the clays. So it's a soil structure. So gypsum, think in terms of soil structure. But a lot of these other, because that's a different form of calcium, that's calcium sulfate. Whereas what you're looking for is calcium carbonate. And so those are just things that you already know, right? So here's a little challenge for you. This is my high tunnel, and these soils, this is soil compost combination. The raised beds up here, the pH on those is 6.8. Is that pretty fair? Yeah, for vegetable production, I think that's pretty fair. These lower beds right here, those are 8.2. The soils were all put in about 9 years ago. Compost soil combination, 2/3 soil, 1/3 compost, and then I just recycle. There's no commercial fertility, there's no fungicide, there's no pesticide, but one held pH and one didn't. Why? Anyone? I know you all know the answer, you just don't want to say it. I think it has a lot to do with leaching. Because one of these, this one, can leach readily right out of the bottom. These down here on the ground themselves have a much more difficult time leaching because there's no rainfall. And then if you're frugal with your drip line, right, because you're being frugal with your water, it actually made the pH scenario a little worse because you didn't allow the leaching to happen. This one leached so readily up here. This one didn't want to leach, right? Because he's already, which I didn't tell you, but he's already sitting on a clay. So it's interesting, after a number of years, it plays out, right? It plays out.
What's the pH of your water?
pH, I use mostly rainwater, unless if I run out of rainwater, then I'll have to use some city water, but it's a good question, Floyd, but mostly rainwater. So it's rather neutral. Yep. Good question.
On that last one, what's your explanation on the magnesium?
So none of these have been added, but initially it was 1/3 compost, 2/3 soil mixture that went into these beds. And now, 9 years later, those are the levels still. Everything gets recycled and cover cropped. Okay, we're going to get into that a little bit further here in a moment. I want you to understand the carbon scenario. There's 4 parts of carbon, 3 in the plant. 1/3 of that carbon's in the grain, 1/3 is in the residue, 1/3 is in the root mass. Okay? Now every crop type is different, but they're all of those components. They're all going to break into those 3 components. So a corn crop will be 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. The grain usually gets tires under it and leaves. If you leave the residue in the field, that's going to help. Most of that carbon in that residue will go to the atmosphere, but some will go to the soil. In the root mass, a little more will stay to the soil, but a lot of that will go to the atmosphere too. That's part of the carbon cycle. So a new plant, a young plant, 30 to 40% of that, 30 to 40, where are we at? Seedlings typically exude, so they're giving off the exudate. About 30 to 40% of their fixed carbon is root exudate. So it's a big investment of the plant, 30 to 40% going in as an exudate. And in the first 1 to 2 months, that's when that has occurred. You've all tasted the exudates, right? So if you haven't, you find a cornfield this coming year, and well before it tassels, dig it up and nip off the ends of the plump roots. Those are the ones giving the exudates off. Nip them off. You can wash them off a little bit if you prefer. And taste those. What are you going to taste? That is going to be the purest sugar taste you can imagine. And you'll never have to think about it again because you used a different sense. It wasn't an old man telling you it. You tasted it. That is different, right? Because it just pops, okay? In all the years I've worked, we've always had people taste these exudates. Only one time did I ask a guy if he said he couldn't taste it. Well, then I noticed a round circle in his back pocket. If you have a round circle in your back pocket, you won't taste anything, okay? So after that, I got a little more cautious, right? So first 1 to 2 months, now you know why you want the cover crop in too. Because you might have 1 to 2 months available. You might have 5 weeks or 6 weeks available. You can get the exudate, okay? So where's the carbon? Parts in the grain, parts in the residue, parts in the root mass. Probably the most important part is in the exudate. You want to move a carbon needle, that fourth one is a big mover, okay? Goes directly to the microbes. Yeah.
So you said 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Is that over the entire lifespan of the crop?
That is, yes.
50 and sometimes as high as 60% exudates, but that's probably in the vegetative stage.
Yeah, you're going to find a range in some of that material depending on the plant also. But yes, it's the amount of carbon it produced over the course of its lifespan. Yep. Good question. His question was in terms of at what point? And the point is that's the full lifespan of that crop. Okay? Full lifespan. But the exudate is only at the beginning stage. After that, the energy, it reverses in the plant. Plant physiology reverses and it wants to make grain. So that energy flow then goes for grain production. Okay. This is your homework for today. I want you to read this article when you get a chance. But this article is well written by Dr. Jansen, a Canadian, I believe in Alberta. And he talks about we should be discussing soil carbon stewardship instead of soil carbon sequestration. The sequestration part is one part you're trying to lock in and not use, whereas carbon stewardship is the entire carbon cycle. We all like to eat, if you're like me, more than once a day, and so the carbon stewardship scenario makes a lot of sense. So if you look at soil organic matter and all this material on the surface of your cropland, it has to decompose, correct? What's at the end of the decomposition trail? When all of this material decomposes, what's at the end? Humic acid, fulvic acid, those are at the end of the decomposition trail. It doesn't break down any further than that, okay? And the third item at the end is this humus or humin, okay? So these are at the end of the decomp trail, all right? Interestingly enough. If it's fulvic acid, it was generally intended to benefit a plant, okay? So if you're thinking about fulvic, usually that's benefiting a plant, nutrient and water retention and uptake. The soil food web right here, it's least resistant to the soil food web. The soil food web is definitely going to go after that, okay? Humic acid definitely is indicated more for the soil, okay? It's a big soil enhancer. Cation exchange capacity, it'll help buffer pH. It won't correct it necessarily, but it'll help buffer the pH. Soil food web, it's going to have some resistance. And here's why voluntary carbon credits always had such a long span on them for a lot of years. Because it takes a long time to get it to this stable, greatly resistant from the soil food web. And it's going to benefit soil structure, okay? This is the structure of the soil. Now, why does the soil food web have trouble consuming this one? Everything's food in a home. Why does it leave that one alone? There's no food left. It consumed everything already. Okay, through this whole process, when you start up here with that organic material and you know, this is the early easy come, easy go stage of soil organic matter. This one's easy come, easy go. Then it gets eventually to the dead. It's the living, the dead, and the very dead. You know, it's like a bad Clint Eastwood movie, right? And so you get those three stages, and then finally you start breaking down to humic and non-humic. This is the one, cellulose in terms of plant cells, and chitin in terms of insects and crustacean and all their exoskeleton. So all of that gets used there, and then you get into the insoluble and the soluble. Okay. So if you add humic acid or fulvic acid, do they have a potential to make a situation better? I think they do, right? Because you are taking a concentrated version of what was on your cropland acres on the surface. Okay? Makes sense? Yeah. Questions before we move on? Okay. So just wanted to show you this. This is from 09 to 20. The carbon cycle is an interesting scenario. This one, if it's orange, that's 20. If it's blue, it was in 09. Okay? And so this one went a lot. This one gained a lot. Every one of all 10 of these fields have a different lifespan. They have a different cropping scheme. Okay? Some are real low carbon crops, some are higher carbon, some have more grazing on them, some have more covers on them. This one gained a lot, but it also is the field that had the most plant diversity, and it had the most grazing days. And then you got others where basically the reverse happened. Okay? So you actually lost carbon because you came in with more low residue crops. You came in with low carbon crops. And for us, that would be pea, that would be canola, that would be soybean. These are all low carbon crops. So I have a lot of frequency of those. These are all no-tilled, but if you have a lot of frequency of those, you're going to give up some carbon. Okay? If you have a lot of the higher carbon crops, you have a lot more corn, wheat, malting barley, covers. Now it's a different story. Now you can start restoring. Can you pick out the corn bean field? Can you pick out a long-term corn bean field?
Probably 8.
This gentleman says 8, and he's exactly right. Yeah. 8. It reached an equilibrium, and it just stayed there. Okay? Reached an equilibrium and stayed. There's no cover crops in field 8. There's no grazing in field 8. Floyd, your last question, Floyd, because you never ask an easy one. So.
This is an hard question. But my observations of the corn soybean rotation in our country, even with cereal rye planted in between the corn and soybean every year, you will not change organic matter hardly anything.
Yeah, it's very difficult. So what's the CN ratio of a corn plant? I believe it's around 65 to 1. What's the CN ratio of a wheat plant? I think it's like 80 to 1. What's the CN ratio of a soybean plant? It's right around 30 to 1. Sometimes you see 29 to 1, something like that. Meaning there just isn't much food in it. There's not a lot of carbon in it. And so growing it is the challenge, right?
Jake?
Yeah.
What's the soil structure of the fields that these are on?
These are all loam soils. Give you a good example of them right there, but those are all loam soils. Yep, good question. Okay, so now I'm going to show you some data that's hard to find. This is long-term data now. Okay, long-term data. I took it in spring of 24. These fields have had no commercial fertility. We started in 09, and we haven't applied commercial fertility. Okay, so we're going to start with that. What's happened? No one in their right mind would do this, right? And so you took commercial fertility out. First thing we took out was insecticides, fungicides, and commercial fertility. We took those 3 out. It still has a herbicide on some fields. Okay? So we're working on the herbicide because that's the more difficult in the pesticide arena. That one is, we find, a little more difficult, right? Because what are my choices then? And so let's look at this. So soil organic matter. 10 fields, average is 3.8. The range is 5.3 to 2.4. The corn bean field is my lowest field. Okay, so that's the lowest amount of soil organic matter out of the 10 fields. So I find that, and that's long-term data at the end of, since 09 to 2024, with no inputs in terms of commercial fertility. Okay, nitrogen. So 10 fields, they averaged 60 pounds that spring. Range was 65 to 40 pounds. The corn bean field had the lowest amount. Sounds like we're beating up the corn bean rotation. It's probably earned it. And so you're looking at that one being the lowest. Phosphorus. This one is really super interesting to me. Our phosphorus availability has improved dramatically. We haven't added phosphorus. Okay, so we haven't added phosphorus. So what's happened with phosphorus? The standard malic averages 33. Once you get past 25, you're into the high category. Okay, you're at the low end of the high category. Okay, ranges from 63 to 13. Corn bean field was again the lowest. So I don't have much plant diversity in that field, right? I don't add cover crops to it. Okay, that one's kind of a control field. This high end on the phosphorus, it had recent history of buckwheat. After that, it just went hello. It doesn't create phosphorus, but it unlocks it, makes it available. Different situation. Okay. But potassium, we're naturally high in potassium. So we averaged 409. Anything over 160 is considered high. Corn bean field again was the lowest. Sulfur, back in the day before the scrubbers were put in all our coal gasification plants, we had all kinds of sulfur because it was in the atmosphere. And then when they put the scrubbers in, they really worked. And all of a sudden everybody's buying sulfur. It was kind of interesting. Anyway, sulfur. We're at 10, and 10 to 15 is medium, ranged from 12.7 to 7.3. Okay, so my field with the lowest amount of plant diversity, no covers, and no livestock integration. Yeah, those are my challenges then. Okay, so one bit more, water stable aggregates.
Can we talk about sulfur just a little bit?
Yep.
This is a puzzle to me. Where does sulfur come from? We talked about acid rain.
So you're going to get some sulfur from the atmosphere, some. And then
You've got sulfur deficient soils, and we're growing multi-species cover crops, blended in with our crop rotation. Can we expect sulfur to increase without adding sulfur? Do we need to add sulfur to enhance the ability to raise organic matter in the soil?
You're jumping ahead to this. So let's jump ahead, Floyd. The man won't quit, right? He just won't quit. Okay, so he's jumping ahead to this. This is your full mineral test. I did it one time, right? One time. Because what do you got? This tells me what I have. Those are inherently in my soils. Now the task becomes to get it into the plant. How does it get into the plant? You have to have what? You got to have soil biology, because they unlock it and they move it to the plant. Now, if I don't have it here, I'm not a purist. I'm going to have to do something different if I don't have it here. But if you don't know this, then you're always kind of like, well, I'm not sure, and you get into these questions, and we've had them all as well, Floyd. But you get into those questions, did I have feldspar and some of those items that broke down? Remember rock, our law, that rock has to break down over time. And so the biology extracts. There's a coolest picture on the internet about a fungi, mycorrhizal fungi, a fungi, not mycorrhizal, but a fungi tapped into a rock. What's it doing? Yeah, it's extracting. Yeah, it's extracting. Okay? And so So to answer Floyd's question, what do you got? What do you got? And these are all in parts per million. Everyone knows how to convert to pounds per acre? The math? Yeah, there's some easy ways to do it. You can cheat, right? If it's a 6-inch probe, you can take it times 2. You'll be close. If it's a foot, you can take it times 4. You'll be close. If it's 3, it's 3-inch. It's direct conversion. If you want to actually do the math, take these parts per million times the number of inches of the depth of the probe times 0.3. And that will give you exact pounds. Or you can do what I would do also, just take it times 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on the depth. And we cheat a little bit. It gets you inside the ballpark. You're maybe not quite on the pitcher's mound unless you actually do the math, but it'll get you pretty close. Okay? So don't worry about the parts per million, but that's how you convert it. But you got to know the depth of the probe, the depth that it was taken at. Okay? The reason you take it times 0.3 is because there's 300,000 pounds of weight in an inch of soil, acre wide. Okay? So you all knew that already. I'm just reminding you. All right. So if Floyd knows this, he knows what those multi-species are capable of. Okay? Because they are going to have a lot of different plants in them, a lot of different exudates. Now the biology is in its prime, and it can do that extraction. So, just to go back here, water-stable aggregates, 48%. Corn bean wasn't horrible, was at 44. Organic carbon, that's the food, 241. Usually if I'm getting around that amount in the organic carbon on the test, that's decent. I got some food to work with, okay? So that's a pretty decent number. Corn bean field was low, yeah, I figured it would be. So pH is interesting. 10 fields. The ideal soil version 2.0 says 6.4 is utopia, and so we came in at 6.5. I did it again in the fall, came in at 6.3. And so I do it every spring, I do it every fall. And so we've been staying neutral. Nitrogen fertilizer itself, you can become more acidic at high levels of nitrogen fertilizer. Not so much from the nitrogen that went in the plant, but from the nitrogen that didn't go in the plant. There lies your pH issue. If nitrogen was 100% efficient, you probably wouldn't see that so much. But what percent of fertility can we expect to get into a corn plant or a soybean plant? Yeah, you're a real optimist. The answer was 60. You're a real optimist. It's probably going to be something lower than that. And so we know this. We don't talk a lot about it, but we know this. So that's one reason you see that volume of fertility, because of the inefficiency in it. Okay.
When you have those high phosphorus ppms, like on the last slide, when you go through and determine your own rates for what you want to throw on there, do you use yield goal? What are you using? Are you using that 25 as high and still throwing stuff out there?
So for us, we aren't putting any fertility on.
No fertility.
None. So this is since 09 has had no fertility. Yeah. And that's why it's a hard adjustment for our minds, because those levels shouldn't be there in our minds, right?
So what are you bringing off of those fields? Are you bringing off, you're not bringing off record yields.
So her question is, what are you bringing off for yields? I'm not going to win the high yield contest in the local cafe. I'm probably not even going to make it to the cool kids table. Okay? And so for us, it's going to be economically more viable, but I have no yield bragging rights. So I'll give you an example on corn. So our corn this past year was around 105 to 110. Neighbors are probably going to be 150, 140. So I'm not going to win the yield goal. I'm not going to win. But that isn't my goal. My goal is to improve that soil, and the goal of the Menoken Farm is to do it on soil function, and then take a look at dynamic soil properties and what is potentially feasible. Yeah. And so one of the things I mentioned, you should have a goal, right? So if your goal is, I want the highest yield in the county, then I know how to work with you, right? And we're going to add some stuff. Hang on and get your checkbook out.
You know what your soil organic matter was in 2009? What the change was?
Yes, sir.
2009.
Yep, right there. So the blue was the starting point in '09.
Well, do you know what the average was? So the average increase was over that time period?
I have not averaged the blue. I have averaged the orange. So the orange
It's 3.8.
is 3.8.
Okay.
The blue, I believe, is a little lower than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious.
Yeah. Yep. Good question. Okay.
Jay, there is a question. I mean, you're not going to have the highest yield for bragging rights at the coffee shop.
Right.
But the highest net return,
Is much more important.
right? That's the one that
Yeah.
earns me the right to be there next year.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Yeah.
a change of focus.
Yeah.
Is very, very necessary. Because not only that, but then the next component is that nutrient concentration.
We started our first, 2 years ago, we started our first nutrient analysis. Yes, and this past year we started our first pesticide analysis in the grain. And those are both two humbling items. And you have to do a little soul searching. There's an old saying in monitoring in my group. If you don't want to know, don't look. Tyler, am I too far off? And that now you're getting into the human aspect. And the human aspect, of course, is very interesting because of who we are, what makes up a human being, right? Okay. That's why I'm willing to work with anyone, but I need your written goal. I need a goal from you. If I don't have that, it just wastes both of our times, right? Okay. Calcium, we get an idea on it, okay? So we're in that range. Magnesium, we're high, right? We're high in the magnesium compared to this. Where am I at? Yeah, right there. And so we're high on, a little high on that. Cation exchange, we're at 17. That's reasonably good. How can I improve that? I can take a look at something like soil organic matter. Yes, sir.
How do you lower magnesium?
Pardon?
How do you lower magnesium?
I have not gone down that road. Can you do it through a plant? You'd have to extract, right? Yeah. Yeah, you're probably going to end up adjusting the ratio with one or the other, the calcium-magnesium ratio. You're probably going to end up adjusting that. That's something I haven't done. Yeah. I have no hesitation to say, I don't know. And that would apply. Good question.
What are your other rotations other than the corn bean? Just adding wheat in?
Okay, so the rotations vary. Every one is different. One of the fields is corn bean. One of the fields is rotational perennials. So it's 5 years of rotational perennials, managed grazed, and then back to crop. Okay, so there's always one of those fields. One of those fields every year is always a full season cover crop. Okay, a high diversity, it's probably going to be 14 species. It's going to be managed grazed. We're going to take off the top half by weight and return the bottom half to the soil surface. So it'll always be one of those fields. One of those fields is always going to be soybean planted green or soybean with a cover. Okay, because soybeans are number one crop. I got a choice to make. I can put my head in the sand and say we're not going to plant any, or I can engage in it and say how can we grow them responsibly and still get aggregates out of it, soil aggregates. So there's different approaches. So I, generally speaking, always have one or two of those. So, and then typically you're going to see maybe one of the fields in flax. You're typically going to see a field of wheat with clover understory, usually 3 or 4 clovers understory. And so you're typically going to see all of those, and then the sequence is a little different in the rotational. There is no set rotation, but in terms of what is going to grow, that is put together by the team each year. But you're going to typically see all those crops. And usually a sunflower crop growing with cover crops as well. No.
And then with wheat, are you spring wheat up there?
We are typically spring wheat. We can grow either. This past year I had a field of spring wheat and a field of winter wheat both. Yep. And then we don't desiccate before harvest. We'll only windrow. And so my reasoning on that is because when I started pesticide testing, I don't like what I see in the wheat with the desiccant. So we went to windrowing it. And that's a dead germ in that wheat, and it's going to the flour mill. And that doesn't work for me. So we windrow it.